welcome to this first webinar in our CPD series on using good governance against bad practices, the role of professionals in the UK, Cyprus, and beyond. This is an online CPD series, and I'm very happy to be able to welcome all of you, distinguished guests, participants, colleagues, and students. So on behalf of the School of Law of UCLan Cyprus, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Cyprus, ICPAC, and the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments in the UK, CISI, and let me admit Kyriakos, it is a real pleasure for me to welcome you all this evening to this first CPD webinar, as I said, in the series on using good governance against bad practices. All three institutions involved in this collaboration, so UCLan Cyprus, an academic institution, ICPAC, a regulatory institution, and the CISI, a professional institution, all with international remit, have in common the facilitation, promotion, and the dissemination of high-end knowledge and know-how to their respective members, including, of course, students and learners, researchers, legal, accounting, and financial and other professionals, as well as the wider public, so that each of them may enhance their strategic position with regards to law, compliance, ethics and integrity, rule of law and justice within their own areas of expertise. And UCLan Cyprus is very proud to enjoy MOUs both with ICPAC and the CISI, which are further evidence of our long-standing mutual commitment and relationship that can only enrich us all. So I would like to warmly thank our distinguished speakers, all very fine legal practitioners and scholars, as well as other types of practitioners, for their willingness and enthusiasm to speak to us tonight, despite their very busy schedules and the time differences. One of our speakers is currently in the States, so let's hope it's going to work out. I would also like to thank all participants, as well as the colleagues who have worked on today's event across all institutions. It's been a lot of preparatory work to put in place this long CPD series. It's a pleasure and honor to be able to engage with so diverse participants to this webinar, including students, academics, but also professionals and the wider public. Before I continue and we start the webinar, please be reminded that this webinar is recorded for the purpose of widening access to educational resources, such as this one, and that you have been asked to consent to this. I would please ask you to keep your cameras and microphones off and to use the chat function in the MS Teams classroom to ask questions or make comments. I will be monitoring the chat. If you do not wish to appear at all on the recordings, then do not use the chat function. Can I also please remind you all that each speaker and other participants will take part for educational purposes in an educational setting. Accordingly, what each participant will provide verbally, electronically, otherwise must not be accepted or interpreted as either legal advice or any form of advice. You may view materials at your disposal in the MS Team classroom, which you are free to take away from this webinar and use, but please with the necessary acknowledgements. Subject to the professional background of each of you, participation may contribute to your formal or informal continuous professional development, CPD, or professional development or personal development, PD, or other self-managed learning and development needs. For example, the CISI has quite a few of those. Cyprus registered lawyers have been asked to provide the registration numbers so that we may report their CPD hours for this webinar onto the Cyprus Bar Association's platform. It is necessary, however, to attend most of the webinar to collect the hours. Let me turn to tonight's topic of corruption and what can be done to confront it. This forms part of the fundamentals in the CPD portfolio of the School of Law in association with legal and other practitioners and scholars. Judging by the diversity of the profiles of the participants tonight, it is an evidence that the topic is of ever-growing importance to all professionals across jurisdictions, as we all act as frontline defenders of good governance principles vis-à-vis bad practices. For the past few years, we at the School of Law of UCLan Cyprus have been organizing knowledge transfer, knowledge exchange events for professionals around the rule of law, compliance, but also AML, dispute resolution, and ethics on a regular basis in the form of seminars, conferences, public lectures, trainings, and online activities. Therefore, we have tried every time to ensure free and open access to educational resources emanating from those events. And I would like to invite you to check our website. You have the link here on the screen. This is the Law Academy website of UCLan Cyprus, as well as our newly established Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on the Rule of Law and European Values, CROLEF, that has a lot of resources in terms of professional development, which are all freely accessible. Turning to tonight's event, I'm very privileged to welcome, in order of appearance, John Hatchard, who is Emeritus Professor at the School of Law of the University of Buckingham in the UK. Hopefully, John will be able to join us. Dr. Klearchos Kyriakides, who is a Senior Visiting Fellow at the School of Law of UCLan Cyprus. Mr. Christian Pelaghias, who is an Associate Lecturer in Anti-Money Laundering Law at the School of Law of UCLan Cyprus and a practicing lawyer too, as well as Mr. Petros Florides, who is a CISI board member. Our discussant tonight will be Mr. Kyriakos Iordanou, General Manager of ICPAC. So I would like to welcome them all. Their rich bios appear in the flyer, so if you don't mind, I would like to refer you to that rather to the bios on the flyer rather than enumerate their long list of achievements, not only in Cyprus, but internationally, so that we have more time to engage. And of course, a warm welcome and many thanks to all of them. Now, in a few words about tonight, in the national and international context of the presidential elections in the Republic of Cyprus that just occurred, which was held, and the war in Ukraine turning a year tomorrow, unfortunately, as well as the aftermaths of the global pandemic and various scandals in Cyprus and globally, the primary aim of tonight's webinar is to consider the main causes of corruption and to identify what can be done to confront those causes, particularly by means of good governance. So to this end, the webinar seeks to define what is meant by corruption and distinguish criminal forms of corruption from other forms of corruption which may give rise to civil wrongs or misconduct. Recognize some of the main domestic causes of corruption and the lessons to be drawn from the experience of the UK, the Republic of Cyprus, and other parts of the Commonwealth in particular. Break down several of the main transnational causes of corruption, including those affecting or arising from the UK, certain British overseas territories, and the Republic of Cyprus, and evaluate the steps needed to foster an institutional anti-corruption culture, which is steeped in respect for the rule of law, professional ethics, and good governance. And this is very important and probably the overarching goal for us tonight. This webinar format provides opportunities for participants to engage in discussions with the panelists about current issues and practical approaches for addressing the issues arising from matters to be discussed tonight, to basically use the chat for this during the Q&A session, basically. So I would like to thank you all very much for providing us with fresh analysis of progress made in the field to date and insights of hot topics. Having said that, I would like to invite our first speaker to the floor, and I am wondering whether John is with us yet or not. If not, and I cannot see him, I will pass the floor to Klearchos. Is that okay, Klearchos? Yeah, you're muted, so you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Can I first check that you can hear and see me?
Very well,
Good.
Klearchos. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we cannot give the floor first to John, but John is actually traveling within the US. That's the reason why. So Klearchos, thank you for stepping in.
That's quite all right. I'm going to set the scene. Before I do so, I have to share the screen and press some buttons, and hopefully that's the screen.
Yes, we can see your
You
screen.
can see the screen.
No
Excellent.
problem at all.
And can I just begin by thanking the organisers, or the co-organisers, for all of their hard work in terms of putting today's webinar together. I'd also like to thank everybody who worked behind the scenes in the marketing department and IT and elsewhere in terms of putting this event of enormous importance together. I'm going to speak for 15 minutes or so on a very important subject, which is good governance and the role that it can perform in the fight against corruption. I'm going to offer some purely personal views. They're not the views of the university or of any other organisation. And I'm going to offer these views from a dual perspective as somebody who is a London-born citizen of the UK and as a citizen of the Republic of Cyprus and by extension of the European Union. So I'm going to provide you with an Anglo-Cypriot perspective. So I'll draw upon both jurisdictions over the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to address 6 questions rather than read them out. I'll just address them one by one. Let's begin with the first question. What is meant by corruption? Well, it's defined, or was in 1998 defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as follows. As far as the verb to corrupt is concerned, the verb to corrupt means to destroy or pervert the integrity or fidelity of a person in his discharge of duty. And related to that is the act of inducing somebody to act dishonestly or unfaithfully, and therefore to make venal. To bribe might also fall within the definition. This, I should stress, was the analysis provided by the Law Commission, a statutory body, in 1998, which drew upon the Oxford English Dictionary. By the same token, or similarly rather, the adjective corrupt means, among other things, to be perverted from uprightness and fidelity in the discharge of duty, or to be influenced by bribery or the like, and to be venal. And an act is corruptive if it has the quality of corrupting or tends to corrupt. Well, that's the Oxford English Dictionary definition. And as you can see here, the definition is one that takes us to both ethics and law. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption of 2003 does not, from the standpoint of public international law, provide a definition of corruption, but what the convention does do is that it pinpoints some modes of behavior which are normally regarded as corrupt. The most obvious one is bribery of a national public official and various other forms of bribery, including bribery in the private sector. Embezzlement, misappropriation or other division of property is another example. Trading in influence, that's another example. Abuse of function is a further example. And if any crimes are committed that are to do with corruption and dirty money is generated, then one comes into the domain of money laundering. And as night follows day, many crimes are followed by concealments or cover-ups. The UN Convention Against Corruption refers to concealment. If you have a look at, I'm giving you here a number of sources. You can actually read the UN Convention by clicking on the link at the top of the slide, and my slides have been made available to everyone on the MS Teams system. If you read the various documents and reports that have been published by the United Nations, one can see various different types of corruption, some of which are at the criminal end of the spectrum. Others may not necessarily be at the criminal end of the spectrum, but nonetheless fall foul of public law or other areas of law. One that's of particular importance to a place such as the Republic of Cyprus is the the element of corruption that encompasses nepotism and cronyism and clientelism. Here, nepotism is defined as the granting of preferential treatment to relatives. Cronyism is defined as the awarding of jobs or other advantages to friends or trusted colleagues, or I might add, in the Cypriot context, to members of a political party because they are members of a political party. There is a definition of, certainly there's a list of types of corruption on the UN list for private sector corruption, which are broadly the same, but there are some others on this list as well, which weren't on the earlier list. A good example is clientelism, which I would suggest applies to both the public sector and the private sector. And we have a lot of clientelism in the Republic of Cyprus. That is to say, you have a person in a position of power or patronage who dispenses that power and patronage, and as a consequence accumulates a network of people that are reliant on that person at the top of the pyramid, or wherever it is that the person happens to operate from. The Republic of Cyprus has adopted a definition of corruption, which one of my colleagues will refer to a little bit later on in the context of the new anti-corruption authority law that was adopted in 2022, and that dovetails with the EU directive of the 5th of July 2017 on the fight against fraud, contrary to the European Union's financial interests. So there is a definition of corruption built into both EU law and the Republic of Cyprus law, but I'm not going to touch on that today. What I do want to emphasize is that when one considers corruption from the perspective of English law, one finds that the term is commonly deployed, but not legislatively deployed, across the spectrum, encompassing criminal forms of conduct or allegedly criminal forms of conduct and non-criminal forms of conduct, which nonetheless might be unlawful or in breach of a code of ethics or a regulatory rule. So across this spectrum, one finds, for example, contraventions or alleged contraventions of criminal law, such as the granting or the receipt of a bribe. One also finds in common law jurisdictions such as England the offence known as misconduct in public office. It's a common law offence. So acts of corruption will not be charged as acts of corruption, but they will be channeled through a prosecution which hinges upon, for example, the Bribery Act or the misconduct in public office common law offence. We then have a slightly different category of corruption-related crimes, which the UK anti-corruption strategy refers to as crimes linked or often linked to corruption. And a good example of that is theft by false accounting or by other means contrary to the Theft Act 1968. That's of particular relevance, of course, to the accountants in the audience, but it also to any lawyers who have to submit accounts or deal with accounts. So theft by false accounting is the classic example of a crime that's linked to corruption. Fraud, contrary to the Fraud Act 2006, is another example. And of course, then we have the money laundering offences, which spin off from one or more of those predicate offences. Then, if we leave the criminal sphere, certain types of corrupt conduct may not necessarily cross the threshold into criminal conduct, but nonetheless constitute unlawful breaches of contract or unlawful breaches of trust, or in the case of public law, unlawful breaches of public law. The best examples of that involve an alleged abuse or excessive power by the holder of public office, or an alleged act of procedural impropriety or another form of procedural irregularity, which is a consequence of corrupt conduct of some sort, but doesn't necessarily cross the threshold into criminal conduct. And then we have the misconduct types of, the types of corrupt conduct that might fall neatly within the definition of misconduct or alleged misconduct, contrary to an employment contract or employment law, or in the professional context, professional misconduct contrary to a regulatory or professional code of conduct. So the message that I wanted to bring across at the beginning of this presentation is that the media latches onto the phrase corruption. The phrase corruption is built into the UN Convention Against Corruption. But when we look at the term from the perspective of English law, it's a bit of a woolly phrase, and it's a useful phrase to have in the dictionary and to have in the legal lexicon, but it really needs to be specified. If an allegation of corruption is made, it needs to be specified with reference to one or more of the items that I've placed on the list, and that's a non-exhaustive list. There may be other breaches or alleged breaches that I could have added on the list there. For example, an alleged breach of the parliamentary code of conduct applicable to members of the House of Commons. That's another example. If I go to the next slide, oops, jumped ahead. Which are the main causes or facilitators of corruption? Well, if you read The Republic by Plato, he discusses corruption in a number of passages, and in one particular passage where there's a dialogue between Glaucon and Socrates, Socrates being the teacher of Plato, reference is made to 4 evils which are, in a sense, causes or facilitators of corruption. One is unrighteousness, the opposite of righteous conduct or virtuous conduct. Second is intemperance, acting in breach of the principle, everything in moderation, nothing in excess. Cowardice, the opposite of moral or physical courage. And ignorance, which is what everyone here is hopefully trying to address by building up their knowledge and understanding of this topic. So those are what Plato treated as causes or facilitators of corruption. I'll just refer to one other source. This is a UK government publication of the then Department for International Development. It's now been swept into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But in January 2015, it wrote that among the causes or facilitators of corruption were weak governance. Weak governance. It didn't say weak government. So you can have a strong government, but it has weak governance. You can have a strong the leadership of a company that is strong, but it nonetheless has weak governance. So the criterion here is weak governance, and that is particularly prevalent in so-called neo-patrimonial systems, where there is a weak separation of the public and private spheres, which results in the widespread private appropriation of public resources, or other potentially corrupt phenomena, such as the revolving door syndrome, where people who work in the public sector then go into the private sector and then come back into the public sector, and conflicts of interest or appearances of conflicts of interest may arise. Then the second example they provide is where we have vertical, such as patron-client, that's top-down, vertical, patron-client, and identity-based, i.e. kinship, ethnicity, religion-based relationships, which have primacy over horizontal, citizen to citizen or equal to equal relationships. And of course, what we have in the Republic of Cyprus as a consequence of colonialism and a defective segregation-based constitution, we have vertical patron-client relationships and identity-based relationships, which are based on kinship, ethnicity, or religion. So we have built into the constitutional architecture and political culture of the Republic of Cyprus the drivers or facilitators or causes of corruption. And then we have what the UK government describes as politics organised around personalism or big man syndrome. We have that in the Republic of Cyprus. Big, powerful men in either business or politics who are able to pull strings, open doors which are closed to the ordinary man or woman, and so on and so forth. So that's the a quick overview of the main causes or facilitators of corruption. Let me just in the remaining time just whiz through the remaining questions that I wanted to touch on. In the fight against corruption, does good governance matter? If so, how much? Well, the answer is good governance is critical to any effective and successful organization in either the public or the private sector. Equally, bad governance is the key to failure. And there's an old Greek saying that comes to mind here. It's from the head that the fish stinks, if I translate it literally, or if I translate it freely, the fish rots from the head down. So the more rotten an organization is, the greater the likelihood is that the rot is set in from the top down. And that underlines the importance of good governance. What are good governance? Well, I just encourage you to read the 12 principles of good democratic governance published by the Council of Europe. That's not the European Union, that's the human rights body that encompasses 46 member states, including the 27 of member states of the EU, plus a number of others, including Turkey, Iceland, and Armenia, but excluding Russia that exited the Council of Europe last year. So those are the 12 principles. They include the rule of law, openness and transparency, and ethical conduct, among others. And as the UN has pointed out, good governance includes both procedural and substantive elements. So let me just let me just show that to you. You can read that in your own time. But one of my arguments today is that good governance is entwined with measures to do with, for example, risk management, anti-bribery, anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, anti-bullying, pro-cyber security, pro-freedom of information, and pro-whistleblowing. In other words, these entities or policies or ideas tend to be treated separately from one another. My argument is that they are all inextricably intertwined with one another. The most obvious example is an anti-bullying policy in any organization must go hand in hand with a whistleblowing policy, because there's no point having a whistleblower or potential whistleblower in an organization terrified to speak out or follow the whistleblowing procedures because of fear of being bullied. If I can just, how long do I have, Stephanie? I've got 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up.
Yes, Claudia, you do. I can't see John on the call, but can someone else see him? It may be that I don't see everyone on this call, but I don't think he's here. So you've got, at the very least, 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll wrap up in 3 minutes. I just wanted to emphasize that one of the key features of good governance is the ability of a member of staff to speak out and to declare wrongdoing or to declare potential wrongdoing. Now, that doesn't mean racing automatically to the newspapers and blurting out whatever it is that is alleged. That might actually be in breach of contract, in breach of confidence. It might be in breach of data protection. What whistleblowing means is that, and the Republic of Cyprus now has a whistleblowing law, as I understand it. There needs to be a policy in place within an organization, and the whistle may be blown by an employee or other person associated with the organization in an appropriate way, in accordance with the policy, in accordance with the correct procedure, and with the procedure being followed by the recipients of the whistleblowing. So people tend to think whistleblowing is just running to the newspapers or running to the media. It's not quite as simple as that. The media is there in exceptional circumstances for a whistleblower to approach, preferably, I would suggest, essentially, after obtaining legal advice. But the best way, the lawful way, the most secure way is to do it through the correct procedure, whichever procedure happens to exist according to the policy that's in place. What goes wrong, however, I'll just mention here the classic case study of the Watergate administration, the Nixon administration. The Nixon administration is a classic case study in bad governance. It's a classic case study of the fish rotting from the top down. And for the lawyers in the audience, it's a classic example of how lawyers can get themselves struck off, or as they call it in America, disbarred. President Nixon was a lawyer who was disbarred because of his misconduct during the Watergate scandal. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, was disbarred for a separate scandal during his tenure as a politician in Maryland. The White House counsel, John Dean, was disbarred. So was Nixon's first Attorney General, John Mitchell. So it's a classic case study of everything that I've been discussing today. The fish rotting from the head down, bad governance from top to bottom, and nobody speaking out except one or two rare exceptions. Elliot Richardson being an example, who resigned as Attorney General in 1973 for refusing to follow what he considered to be, and what I consider to have been, an improper order from President Nixon. Very quickly, the Republic of Cyprus and the United Kingdom are bound to one another for various reasons, which most of you in the audience should be familiar with. But what the relevance of this is that the UK is exposed to corruption, or any corruption, in the Republic of Cyprus, and vice versa. The fact that in 2017 there was an annual, well, the figures there speak for themselves. There's a massive financial relationship between the UK and the Republic of Cyprus. That's good in the sense that creates jobs, it creates opportunities for businesses to thrive and succeed, but it's also the breeding ground potentially for corruption. Another reason why we're both exposed is because we're right in the thick of the irregular migration flows and illegal narcotics trafficking flows from Asia into Europe. So we're both exposed to the risks of various crimes and the risks of money laundering relating to that. We also, both the UK and the Republic of Cyprus, have had exceptionally close relations with President Putin and the Putin regime until relationships soured. And you can see here some photographs from the good old days before the relationship soured. And what we are exposed to are the proceeds of corruption and the proceeds of other illicit activities emanating from Russia. So too are British overseas territories such as Bermuda. Here there's some statistics from the US State Department which speak for themselves. You can see that the UK, the Republic of Cyprus, Russia, Jersey, the British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, all territories under UK sovereignty, with the exception of the Republic, are exposed to the dangers associated with corrupt money emanating from Russia. There's clean money that's emanated from Russia as well, I should stress. And everything now has gone pear-shaped through the situation in Ukraine and the imposition of enhanced sanctions. In closing, let me just flag up the Economic Crime Transparency and Enforcement Act 2002. I've got some materials here which members of the audience can read in their own time. The next speaker is going to discuss that, I hope. Let me just finish by drawing your attention to the new, where is it? Here we go. Yeah, the new Independent Authority Against Corruption website, which I discovered has come into existence within the last day or so. And there's an interview with the commissioner that I heard earlier today. So I've given you the link on the slides for you to go to the website of the new Independent Authority website. And let me just finish by drawing your attention to some opinion poll statistics. We need to take opinion polls results with a pinch of salt, but last year the citizens of the Republic of Cyprus, or a greater number of citizens of the Republic of Cyprus, perceived their country to be exposed to corruption far more than any other member state of the EU. So that's the Cyprus in gold medal position for all of the wrong reasons. And what one also finds is, I would suggest, a potential correlation between high corruption and bad health, or bad public health. The excess mortality rates across Europe are not being spoken about as they should be, but there appears to be at least a correlation between high corruption in places such as Cyprus, Greece, Italy, and Spain, and high excess mortality. Cyprus has got, in November 2022, was in the gold medal position for that as well, for all the wrong reasons. And government debt is another problem that I would suggest is linked to corruption. So to finish, I've listed six principles I'll just read one of them out and then I'll close. The payment of lip service to the rule of law, professional ethics, and good governance is not enough. These principles must be applied and be seen to be applied by the leadership, management, and other personnel of every transnational, national, or local organ of governance and every entity in every sector in every country. These principles should infuse the culture of every such entity and form the backdrop to the humane social contract linking citizens to the state and linking employers to employees. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a broad brush overview of why good governance matters so much and why good governance is the essential antidote to corruption and also the prevention, the key to the prevention of corruption.
Thank you very much, Klearchos. I'm sure there will be plenty to discuss because you've basically introduced and highlighted some very interesting correlations, but also causes and manifestations of corruption. So thank you so much for this and for sharing.
Have I removed the slides from the screen, or can you still see them?
Not yet. You need to unshare your screen so that the next speaker can share his screen. Now, I do not see Professor Hatchard. So let me just call and see whether he's here and I can't see him. Professor Hatchard, he's not. So he's probably delayed in the airport. Fine. Could I call on Christian to present next? Because we had agreed that Petros would be actually concluding with some recommendations. So Christian, you need to share your screen.
Certainly.
And if John appears in the meantime, then we will slot him between you two. By the way, I have Professor Hatchard's slides in any case, so they can be uploaded to the MS Teams. We had his permission to do so. Adelina, if you have the slides, you can do that. So we can see your screen, Christian. Thank you very much. You just need to start the slideshow.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
So thank you. And similar to Kyriakos, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate today. I have taken perhaps a little bit of a different approach, sort of starting from the point of exploring some of the causes of corruption more from a theoretical point of view rather than a legal one. The reason for that is when we started talking about this amongst ourselves, I was posed with the question because my background, I was born and raised in Sweden and qualified as a Swedish lawyer before coming to Cyprus, was that, well, Sweden doesn't have any corruption. I was that made me kind of sort of think, because there is a sort of a clear notion that some countries are more corrupt than others, and that some countries have a more sort of embedded culture of corruption than perhaps others, and that made me sort of want to take a little closer look at whether this is the case or not, and why, if that is the case, this may be. So I'm hoping to pose some provocative statements, at least for the discussion later on. We'll jump straight to it. Following up on Kyriakos's presentation a bit, it's apparent that there are very different types of definition of what corruption is. So we've heard that there's a UN definition, there's an English definition, and so on and so forth. And I think this is part of the problem, because while we easily talk about corruption, there is no real maybe understanding is the wrong word, but there is no real agreed definition of what corruption may entail, at least of where the boundaries are. Because if you want to, you could take the concept of corruption and take it extremely far. But there has been, at least in the latest attempt, which Klearchos mentioned, is in the new law for the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Authority in Cyprus, that makes reference to the Criminal Law Convention on Corruption from the European Council. And I've listed the definition there because I think this is, at least along the lines that I will be talking, more corresponds to the sort of definition of corruption that I think that we can all agree sort of fits. But at the same time, there's also a different approaches to corruption. There's a traditional approach of how to study cause and effect and counter corruption, which is sort of from a political and economic factors, how to prevent political corruption within the political system, how to detect and prevent corruption within the economic system as well. But that has been complemented over the recent years with a more sort of, how can you say, more of a behavior-based approach, where you look at history, tradition, culture, family, education, socioeconomic environments, effects, and so on and so forth. And this has sort of led to the discussion on corrupt culture, or the culture of corruption, which is namely that a predisposition that a group behaves in a very corrupt way and has more tendency to apply corrupt ways than others. Okay, so when we look at then, we start looking at some of the causes of corruption. So what we've seen in the last number of years, especially here in Cyprus, is that there's been an upswing of corruption cases, and everybody, the media is talking about corruption, and corruption is everywhere. Well, there are essentially three major factors for that. The first is that corruption is universal. It exists in all countries, in all systems, despite how far in the development they may be. It exists, and that is a fact. There are increased public exposure as well. Media, the internet, and finding information and doing investigative research and so on has become much more simpler to do. And with the introduction of whistleblowing legislation and various other sort of pieces of legislation that allows a more transparent system, also brings sort of the corrupt beast into the light in order to be killed. Then we also need to say that, I mean, corruption is regarded as the major obstacle for economic development. So the more eager a country may be to develop economically and trade internationally and so on, the more exposed its indigenous corruptive practices will be. As the more it functions on the international scene, the more it will have to change its ways, so to speak. So there's a number of factors that affect corruption, and I've listed some of them. This is not an exclusive list in any way, and there are many other factors that can be added to this list, but considering the amount of time that we have, I've decided to sort of keep it to a handful of them. But the first one, and there are no particular sort of order of priority at all, but if we look at state rules and authorization, is a factor. This means that wherever you have the ability to grant monopoly power by government, you have an increased risks of corruption. Governmental size and its activities, sort of there's a debate between large government that lead to more corrupt politicians vis-a-vis large governments that are more equipped to counter corruption because they have more funds and so on. And here it more is a question of the level of democracy and the progressiveness of the democracy within that particular society, as well as the effectiveness of the judiciary that is key, that will determine whether a large government is more adapt to deal with corruption or not. We have democracy and political system, essentially that democracy, democratic tradition, and so on are very important in order to manage corruption levels. However, it's also shown in various studies and so forth that democracy that are relatively new have a longer period in order to develop the tradition, the democratic traditions necessary in order to effectively deal with corruption on various levels. So the younger a democracy is, the more corrupt it will apparently, and the older a democracy is, the more equipped and adapted it will be in order to deal with corruption. Lack of transparency and accountability. Obviously, this is something which is key, which has been mentioned by Klearchos, is a major problem here in Cyprus, is transparency in rules and laws and processes, which in turn creates a fertile ground for corruption. Accountability and predictability under the law is also of crucial importance. Making sure that there is a legal system that holds the perpetrators accountable and that the laws are comprehensible enough so that it can be predicted to see, if I commit a certain act, there will be a certain consequences under the law for that. We also have the need for professional ethics and proper legislation. Professional ethics, I believe, especially when it comes to professions like service providers, lawyers, and accountants, and so forth, is of crucial importance. Obviously, this also goes for members of parliament and other government officials, that you have ethical guidelines that needs to be followed and that they are properly enforced. Because you may even have situations where you have very rigorous sort of legislation that deals with illegal, what's known as sort of legal corruption, but legal corruption is more seen as okay, namely, the old boys network and cryonism and so on. So softer acts of corruption is considered more acceptable and justifiable. But professional ethics and proper legislation will counter that as well. Quality of institutions, good effective government institutions are needed in order to stem spread of corruption, of course. Anti-corruption officers must have independence from the political establishment, ample resources and personnel of the highest integrity. If you haven't had a chance to look at the new law in Cyprus, please do. It's evident that this is what they're hoping to achieve with this legislation. I do hope that it will be given proper resources and be staffed with the right type of people, that they will be able to take on this enormous task that it actually entails of carrying the anti-corruption ambitions, not just in Cyprus but in any country. It's an enormous task. So good luck to them. Competition, of course, the more competitive business environment you have, the less risk of corruption there will be. And press freedom is one of the most important traits of anti-corrupt society. It's sort of the fifth state within the state, so that there is a free press that can do investigations and bring its findings into the open. And finally, also big emphasis on the judiciary, a high quality judiciary that is able to hold government accountable for any illegal actions. And let's remember that when we're talking about anti-corruption measures, and there are different thoughts on whether these should be coming from a grassroots level or a top down level. I'm personally, my opinion is that it should come from the top down, and in order to have that, you need a proper functioning and an independent judiciary. If the top tier, like Klearchos mentioned as well, if the top tier is corrupt, there will be no ambition for the lower levels of society to uphold those rules either. You cannot expect the average man to be uncorrupt when the politicians are corrupt. That I think that is impossible to have any form of change in that respect. So we come to the question of culture and corruption, and then we must ask ourselves sort of, okay, what is culture? It's a very big concept. It's a large definition of what culture is, and how would you fit that into corruption? Well, there is something that is sort of called cultural relativism, which essentially that it's one person's beliefs and practices should be understood based on that person's own culture. And in the case of corruption, it means that, you know, what is perhaps perceived as corrupt in one culture may not be perceived as corrupt in another culture. Here you have examples of bringing gifts to somebody to show appreciation, or helping somebody, you know, with you help me, I help you type of thing, just of being nice, you know, of showing appreciation. That in other countries may not be seen as corruption. In other systems it will be. But it also implies that you cannot have one size fits all definition for corruption, that it has to be defined within a cultural context rather than with a broad cultural definition. There are different thoughts about this, and I think this is, you know, there are different opinions on whether you can have a one size fits all, or if the definition should be adjusted with sort of a more of a cultural cling to it. But essentially, if you follow that thought of cultural relativism, then you need to distinguish between cultural values and cultural practices. So there's a big difference, let's say, between having corrupt values and applying corrupt practices. You can still have good values, but you're placed in a system that can only survive with corrupt practices. It doesn't mean that you carry corrupt values, but there is a clear distinction in that, and it's an important distinction, at least in my opinion, when dealing with anti-corruption measures. Culture can also be used to explain the emergence of corruption, as well as how to counter corruption if you adjust the countermeasures depending on that particular state and so on. Education, of course, plays an important role, and we mentioned that before. Education, ethical guidelines, legislation, and what we're doing here tonight, for example, is a very important piece of that sort of anti-corruption puzzle, that we start looking at and educating ourselves. What is corruption? How do we counter it? What do we need? You know, what are the components and so on. Coming back to my initial statement, I will do just a brief comparison between Cyprus and Sweden, for the simple reason that it's extremely difficult to compare. It is apples and oranges completely. These are two states with completely different historical trajectories, political systems, legal systems, religions, socioeconomic factors, and so on. But these are charts from Transparency International on their corruption index. And I think what's interesting here, even though, yes, Sweden scores considerably much higher than what Cyprus does, but there is a down-going trend in corruption efficiency as well in Sweden. And I think this proves that the thing is that corruption is universal. The difference in corruption, though, is apparent. So if you look, for example, at the Greco, the Greco of which is the institution that deals with corruption under the Council of Europe, they publish various sort of evaluation reports on different countries. Unfortunately, not at the same period of time, so they're sort of difficult to examine. But for example, in the case of Cyprus, one of the main deficiencies there has been the lack in proper legislation countering corruption. While in Sweden, the legislation is there and working very well and effectively. However, cryonism is still the main problem. The old boys network, the favoritism in corruption is very well widespread, especially amongst parliamentarians and sort of lower government officials, rather than hand-to-hand sort of bribery cash transactions or sort of these sort of things. Because Sweden also has a much more developed global trade than Cyprus, especially within the arms industry. There has been pretty well documented corruption cases involving the sale of arms to various different countries as well in the past. Not so much now, but it has been there. So just to sort of conclude what I've been, at least what I've been trying to get across, is that that corruption needs to be addressed by a holistic approach. It needs to be looked in its whole, cannot just be itemized and compartmentalized. Countering corruption is a process that involves long-term national strategies that needs to be consistently implemented, which means you cannot start the process, then have elections, the process gets halted, and then it changes and so on. You need a national strategy that is consistent, independent from whoever comes into power. When we're addressing the concept of corruption, we need to distinguish between corrupt values and corrupt practices. And anti-corruption measures must come from the top down. And finally, key countermeasures includes education, transparent government operations and procedures, and accountability under the law, and an effective and just judicial system. So that concludes my presentation, and I look forward to the discussion session later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for painting a broader picture. And yes, indeed, I mean, you have addressed what we were discussing at the very beginning. It was this idea of looking at the culture of corruption in different jurisdictions, particularly from the Scandinavian states. So thank you so much. I think that gives us some food for thought. And, you know, it fights prejudices as well. So that's very interesting. Thank you so much. Now, let's come to Petros, who's been waiting patiently and listening, I'm sure. Petros, are you able to share your screen as well?
Indeed. And in the meantime, can you confirm that you can hear me as well?
Yes. You will have to perhaps turn on a little bit your mic so that we can hear you louder.
Closer.
Yes, that's better.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And let me also begin by thanking everyone, the organizers, the participants. It's been a good process, and thank you for being here tonight as well. So I will be focusing on what can be done to confront corruption. And I'm also going to make reference to the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index. And here is Cyprus's score, more or less mid-table, ranking, well, it could be worse, but it could be a lot better, and perhaps more concerning is that the trend, as we've already seen, is actually on the way down. So we're not at a high level anyway, and we're trending downwards. So there is definitely a problem. Now, the corruption index, let's just unpack to see what it looks at. It looks at bribery. It also looks at diversion of public funds, officials using their public office for private gain without facing consequences, ability of governments to contain corruption in the public sector, excessive red tape in the public sector, which of course gives rise for opportunities for corruption, nepotistic appointments in the civil service, laws ensuring that public officials must disclose their finances and potential conflicts of interest, and legal protection for people who report cases of bribery and corruption, and state capture by narrow vested interests. So you'll see that the Transparency International's index actually focuses on the public sector, and that's where my talk will actually focus, and you'll see why. And access to information on public affairs, government activity. So quick look at what the index does not cover. Citizens' direct perceptions or experience of corruption, tax fraud, illicit financial flows, enablers of corruption, and this is where the professionals, of course, come in, lawyers, accountants, financial advisors, and others, money laundering, and private sector corruption, informal economies and markets. So this is what does not get covered with the Transparency International Index, but for my purposes today, we are going to be focusing on the public sector because in particular in Cyprus, we have a very large public sector. I think it's something like 25% of our economy, but perhaps others, Kyriakos in particular, may know the precise number, but we do have a large public sector. So battling corruption in specific areas, I think, is very important. So what can we do about corruption? I think we need to be focused as well as broad in our actions. So back in 1997, the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers adopted this resolution to ensure that the organization, functioning, and decision-making processes of public administrations take into account the need to combat corruption, in particular by ensuring as much transparency as is consistent with the need to achieve effectiveness. So we can see how our topic for tonight, corruption and transparency, which is a very important part of governance, is right there in terms of what already has been adopted. So let's have a look at what we mean by governance. Now, way back with the first code of governance in the UK in the early 90s, the first report, known as the Cadbury Report after Sir Adrian Cadbury, the author, actually identified in the preamble of that code 4 fundamental principles of good governance. Unfortunately, the latest iterations of that code don't actually make reference to these 4 fundamentals, which is a shame, in my opinion. But I'm continuing to use them because I think they are so good. The first one is transparency. Now, often people misunderstand what transparency means. It does not mean full disclosure because there are always things that are private, confidential, and sensitive. So we need to judge properly what needs to be disclosed. So transparency is actually appropriate disclosure. Now, of course, the question there would be, well, what is appropriate and who deems what is appropriate? We'll come back to that, but that's a judgment call. Next, it's accountability. What do we mean by accountability? Well, ISO 37000 actually makes it very clear, and I agree with its definition. It's the matching of authority with responsibility. Now, a board of directors is always accountable for everything that goes on in an organization, even if they are not responsible, because a board of directors will delegate responsibility to do certain things with the level of authority needed. But because the board of directors do the delegating, they are ultimately accountable. So it's very important when we talk about accountability that we match responsibility with authority. Otherwise, you only get scapegoats. And unfortunately, we see this a lot in organizations and in politics, where someone gets the blame and is basically the people that really are behind the misdemeanor, the crime, whatever it is, get away with it by blaming someone else down the organizational food chain. The next one is probity. I'm speaking to lawyers, so you're familiar with this expression. It's a combination of justice, honesty, and fairness. And this is really where we answer the question, who determines what is appropriate? It all depends on both not only compliance with laws, rules, and regulations, but also ethics. And at the heart of all good governance systems must be ethics. Otherwise, what you have instead is tyranny. You can have governance that is liberating, or you can have governance that is tyrannical. And at either end of the extremes of the political spectrum, both are tyrannical systems of governance. So don't hear governance as being necessarily good. It depends on the ethical underpinnings of that particular system. And that is what guides what is appropriate in terms of disclosure. Yes, we should always err on the side of transparency and disclose as much as we can, but we do need to make judgment calls around the level of privacy, confidentiality, and sensitivity. If done in good faith, then you have a robust system of good governance. And finally, sustainability. Now, in days gone by, we would be focusing on financial sustainability, and I always define that as being medium to long-term efficiency and effectiveness. You can be a penny pincher and not spend money, but then not achieve your organizational goals and objectives. The other way around, you can achieve your organizational goals and objectives quite quickly, but end up spending all your money. So to be financially stable, it needs to be medium to long-term efficiency and effectiveness. Of course, the conversation under the ESG environment these days, we expand sustainability. I like to use the Value Foundation Reporting's definition, where it's financial first and foremost, because without that, you can't achieve anything else. Then it's intellectual, social, human, natural, and manufactured. Those are the 6 capitals under the Integrated Reporting Council, now folded into the Value Reporting Foundation. So sustainability is the final principle. So these are the principles of good governance. What we need to do is make sure that they are robust in order to design out, have quality assurance, if you like, against corruption. Now, I've ordered them in that way as a memory aid, because we can use the first letter of each one of these principles to spell TAPS. So what we need to do, how do we actually confront corruption and do something about it? We need to turn on the taps. We need to be transparent, accountable, have probity, and be sustainable. So you can imagine showering, you turn on the taps, and the 4 fundamental principles will help you wash away the stench of corruption. If we integrate this into our organizational culture, our systems, our policies, our practices, our procedures, and also if we nourish ourselves with these 4 fundamental principles. In other words, we internalize them and make them the way in which we actually get nourished as an organization. So as a learning aid, turning on the taps, both washing away the exterior, but also becoming organic in terms of good governance. So we may all be familiar with the fraud triangle. I've added corruption because I think we can use the same philosophy in terms of not just fraud, but corruption. So as we all know, there are 3 factors at play: the pressure, then the opportunity, and then the rationalization. And this, unfortunately, is a negative cycle. So on the pressure side, there may be personal financial challenges, there's addictions, the need to meet financial targets, and the desire for status. On the opportunity side, a means to an end, weak internal controls, position of power, trust abused, secrecy, concealment is critical. And then on the rationalization side, I deserve it, I had to do it, I'll pay it back eventually, everybody else is doing it. So this is the negative cycle. And what I suggest we do, I've recalibrated the fraud corruption triangle into an anti-fraud, anti-corruption triangle. So we need to recalibrate the pressure that people may find themselves under. So now we have expectations, financial and non-financial rewards, aligned with supporting transparency, accountability, probity, and sustainability. So there's an old saying, what gets measured gets done, and people do what you pay them to do. So if we start recalibrating the way in which we assess people's performance, and it's not just for the tangible, but it's also for the intangible, and we start developing metrics around the extent to which we are transparent, accountable, probate, and sustainable, and actually live that out, then I would say that that's the beginning. Next, reduced opportunity. So clear, comprehensive, and robust policies, procedures, and processes supported by risk management and internal controls, including segregation of duties, real-time checks and balances, and internal and external based on international standards and certification. So even if someone did feel the pressure, we need to design out the ability to actually be corrupt. And that means good internal governance. So when we talk about governance, it depends what context we're talking about, and we need to adopt what is often referred to as enterprise risk management. In other words, not risk management, sorry, enterprise governance. In other words, having governance across the enterprise and not just reduced to certain organs of governance like the board, like the AGM, like external audit. We need to have internal governance, and those of you who work in financial services know that the European Banking Authority has guidelines on internal governance, and it's all the things here that we talk about to try to design out the ability for actually people to become corrupt. So we reduce that opportunity, and then diminishing rationalization, increasing the probity, i.e. honesty, fairness, and justice, making it harder to rationalize unethical behavior. So we need to change the conversation. So I would say we can use the fraud triangle or corruption triangle and make it an anti-fraud, anti-corruption triangle by reversing the cycle and it becoming positive rather than negative. So some of you know that some time back in 2019, we managed to get a code of governance passed by the Council of Ministers for the public sector. And I say we because it was a team effort. Yes, I was the lead author, and there are people here that were the review and editing team, but you can see how it was a partnership. It was done under the auspices of the Institute of Directors in Cyprus, EIMF, European Institute of Management and Finance, the CIIM, Cyprus Association of Quality, the Cyprus Internal Auditors, and CELC. And I want to thank Kyriakos as well for his support, input, guidance through the process. So it was a team effort, and we managed to get this passed. Now, this code was written in response to the double whammy that we in Cyprus suffered in 2013 when our two systemically important banks collapsed, and we also had a collapse of government. And we got to that point or that place because of bad governance. And as Einstein says, you don't fix the problem with the same consciousness. So the only way of getting out the hole that we found ourselves in was through good governance. Now, to be fair, the systemic banks in Cyprus now are under the purview of the European Central Bank, and the standards are high. And those of you who haven't become familiar with the governance directive of the central bank, that I would say is the gold standard of governance, and you can always go to that to see how detailed it actually is in terms of expectations on our systemically important banks. Where there was a gap, and this is back to the point why I focused on the Transparency International CPI, is because government, wider government, state-owned enterprises is a huge part of the Cypriot economy, society and culture. So we need to, I think, address that as well, which is why we focused on writing a code for that particular sector. So what I call here is what we need to do in our state-owned enterprises is organizational DNA, and we need to do some gene therapy. So how do we do that? We have to establish principles. So the governing body, the board, ensures the organization upholds clearly defined values and constructively engages with relevant interested parties, and that is covered in section 1 of the code. Then in sections 2 and 3, based on the organization's principles, the governing body adopts a properly resourced strategy and ensures the necessary organizational capacity exists to meet objectives in accordance with established policies. So we need to systemize this throughout the organization. It won't be done through words alone. And we'll come back to one of the cultural idiosyncrasies that we have in Cyprus, where we say a lot of things, but don't necessarily implement them. Then, in terms of section 4, systems of processes and procedures, the governing body oversees risks and internal controls in a way that supports the organization in setting and achieving its objectives. And then finally, section 5 of the code, the governing body provides the required oversight to assess organizational conformance and performance. And this is very important in governance. We don't just do governance for the sake of compliance. That's very important, but that's just the beginning. We need to actually perform and satisfy our stakeholders' legitimate expectations, ensuring timely and accurate reports are produced for informed decision-making and communication to interested parties. Now, there is a section 6 of the code, which looks specifically at the board of directors and the expectations of how the board of directors operates. but that's less relevant for this particular seminar today. Now, very importantly, you'll see a loop between beginning the process with constructive engagement with relevant interested parties, and then at the end, communication to interested parties. And this, I think, is the ace up our sleeves when it comes to combating corruption within the state-owned enterprises. We need to mobilize the wider stakeholder base. And I'll come back to this point when I give a call to action in terms of what can we do? What is our role and responsibilities as professionals, as active citizens, to facilitate good governance as opposed to bad governance or even indifferent governance. So here are some definitions of corporate governance. The UK Corporate Governance Code, way back, as I said before, first established this definition in the Cadbury Code, and it's survived over time because it's very holistic and easy to remember. So corporate governance is a system by which companies are directed and controlled. So a system meaning it's intentional. Directed is forward-looking, controlled is present. So we have a very holistic, easy to remember, intentional philosophy around what corporate governance is. And this has stood the test of time and is often still used today. Now, ISO 37000 came out last year, the first international standard in governance, which is a fantastic standard. And those of you not familiar with it, I would suggest you have a read just out of interest. This defines governance as governance of organizations is a human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for achieving its defined organizational purpose. This is more comprehensive, probably a bit harder to remember, but I think an enhancement on the UK Governance Code. And just for comprehensiveness, we'll look at the OECD. Corporate governance involves a set of relationships between a company's management, its board, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. Corporate governance also provides a structure through which the objectives of the company are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring performance are determined. So there's no way I would remember that. My memory is not that good. So I usually use a hybrid of the UK code and the ISO 37000. And I define as a working definition governance as being a human-based system by which companies are directed and controlled. And that's the emphasis, excuse me, I want to put today. We've spoken about culture, and that is key. Now, governance can be form and structure. And that's why governance that we experience in many organizations takes a quasi-legal feeling, because there's two professions that stepped into the gap very early, at least in the UK, which is my background, my experience, when the UK had a series of corporate collapses in the early 90s, and the government of the time told the practitioners, sort this problem out, otherwise we would have to pass laws in order to do it for you. And so there was a gap in that process. And the legal profession and the accounting profession, which I'm a member of, amongst other professions, stepped into that gap, which is quite often why governance is experienced as almost quasi-legal, very systems, policies, procedures, because those two professions, great professions that they are, that's their training. So governance quite often takes on that form and structure approach. However, any of you who have actually served on a board or worked in an organization, governance, the rubber hits the road, not with the form and structure, but with the people who are sitting around the table or are working in the organization. So governance fundamentally is dictated by culture. And we've already spoken about how important culture is. It's the people within the system that determine what kind of governance you really have. Even with the best form and structure in the world, if you don't have the people in the right place with the courage to actually exercise their role and responsibilities, you just have rubber stamping and a sham. So fundamental to good governance is the fact that we have the right people and we train and develop them. And that's how we can actually confront corruption, we need the laws, we need the rules, we need the regulations, absolutely. But then we need to focus on the people who are actually in those seats of power. So let's have a quick look at culture. We've already had a good look at it already, but I use the ABC model as a reference point. A is attitude. Now, a proxy for attitude could be values. What are our values? and how do we live them out? And that's the way that we engage with the world. So you can say that's our attitude in life, which is influenced by our values. Next, it's behavior, the way that we actually live out those values or not. We may have a set of values in theory, but we live completely differently to those values. So behavior is the key, and that eventually leads to our culture. So our attitude shapes our behavior. Now, either our attitude as declared or the attitudes we really hold in our hearts, but attitude shapes behavior, and over time, behavior forms culture. And then that becomes either a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. The reason we have toxic cultures is because we have a bad attitude leading to bad behavior, a poor culture or a bad culture, and then that reinforces the bad attitude and bad behaviors, as opposed to having good attitudes, good behaviors, and a good, healthy culture. So it's very important that we understand, and it starts at the top. We've already mentioned this. It's about values. So attitude is motives and intentions. What motivates us, what drives us, what energizes us to do something, and what are we hoping to achieve by it? Now, every single one of us on this call has done the right thing for the right reason. At the same time, every single one of us has done the right thing for the wrong reason. Okay, so the outcome is right, but you did it for ulterior motives. Okay, and all of us have to put our hands up and say, yes, I can think of a time when I did the right thing, but not really for the reasons that I was declaring. So we have to make sure that we're always self-reflective and we really are doing things the right thing for the right reasons. Behavior, not just what we do, but the way in which we do it. It's not just about closing the deal, it's how do you close the deal. It's not just the engagement you have with other people, but how do you engage with other people? Are you a catalyst for better behavior, or do you cause people to actually misbehave? And then fundamentally, the organizational norms and practices is the result. So if this model is helpful for you to remember, then please do use it. The best regulator of behavior is in an organization is the culture. A culture is made up of the prevailing norms, values, and practices. And these are much more powerful agents to ensure that people do the right thing than regulation. Please don't get me wrong. We need laws, we need regulation, we need rules, we need that form and structure that the legal and accounting profession specialize in. But we also need to ensure that we work on the human side of the equation, the soft skills, which are quite often harder to master. And I think we all know that because we all fail at times. I know I do. And we have to keep reminding ourselves as professionals to be developing the soft skills and not just the hard skills. So when we had our financial crisis, the two systemic banks collapsed, I started to write a series of public articles, which if you Google my name, you can still find them. There's about 15 or so articles that was written to the general public to get them to understand that we're here because of bad governance and the only way forward is good governance. And that was the seed, if you like, of the final code that was written and passed, as you saw in 2019. And one of my articles was called Cyprus's 7 Deadly Sins, which is some cultural idiosyncrasies that I observed, which is what got us to where we are. And many of these have already been mentioned already, so I'm reinforcing what has been said by others, but we can still go through them. The first one is cronyism. Now, one of the articles that I wrote was all about how in Cyprus we have a system of governance that could be called the spoils system, and that comes from the English expression, to the victor goes the spoils. And you can see that every time there's a presidential election, then what happens is that they start to fill the boards of the different state-owned enterprises with people who they trust, who they know, party members, and the parties horse trade between each other in terms of how many seats on the boards are actually going to be filled by their party members. And they don't do this with any embarrassment. Back to the point where it's cultural and people don't think that this is a bad thing. To the victor goes the spoils. I won the elections. I now am able to put my own people onto the boards, and I will give concessions to the other parties for their people based on horse trading. It's just thought normal, but cronyism therefore exists. You have your mates, your buddies, your friends, the people you trust, rather than selecting on merit alone. As a result of cronyism, what we do when we do pass laws, they're not taken very seriously, and that's the issue of tokenism. In fact, there is a law, I'm sure you can all quote it, your legal scholars, unlike me, but there is a law that actually prohibits cronyism. But it's never been utilized. No one's ever been prosecuted for it, which is an example how we have lots of laws, rules, and regulations and supposedly best practices, but they're not being implemented. And it's the implementation that is key. And this is why now we have the code. And to be fair, we were working with the Ministry of Finance to actually get it up and running and have it measured. But then COVID struck, and of course, that was the priority. So there was a 2-year lull in activity around the code. But now we're hopefully post-COVID. We are now starting to re-engage, and especially now after the elections, we're going to actually reconnect with all the necessary stakeholders to get this up and running. So if we don't actually implement the things that we say, then it's just hot air. The next one is short-termism. Never looking for the long term, but going for the short-term profits and not thinking over the cycle. And as a result, we tend to have populist decisions. So we want to be popular. We're a small island. Again, this is cultural. Everyone knows each other at least 1 or 2 degrees. So it's difficult to make hard decisions that will have a certain segment of the population suffering, because it's very easy to get to the decision makers and start pulling on their heartstrings. So what we tend to have is short-term populist measures, which only lead to problems in the long run. And then we blame someone else. So we're very good at finding scapegoats. It's not our fault. It could be the power of reasons why things went wrong, but it wasn't us. Because we've chosen things that are populist, we didn't want to take those hard decisions, and therefore we can blame somebody else. And also clientism. So what then tends to happen is that we start operating in a way where there is that power horizontal that was mentioned already, vertical, in terms of how can we help each other, and horizontal. So the clientism is big. I won't spend much time because we've spoken about that already. And then the only way to survive in such an environment is going back to your tribe. Now, your tribe could be your family, it could be your village, it could be your political party. And when you have tribalism, that closes the loop back to cronyism. So this is a vicious cycle where I've identified back in September 2013 what I call the 7 deadly sins. And I think they are as alive today as they were then. So culturally, we need to address it, but changing culture takes a long time. It does not happen overnight. So we just need to be patient, and we need to be diligent and persevere through the process. So the call to action.
Thank you, Petros.
Are we out of time?
Yes, we are
Okay.
out of time, although it's very interesting. So if you want to give your recommendations.
Well, these are the 3. So we need to pressure the new government, relevant ministries to fully implement the code of governance. And all of us, when I say we, it's all of us. It's the professionals, it's the citizenry. We all need to get behind this, get personally involved in the accountability process, and use your influence for others to do the same. And finally, support the development training of the general public to increase its involvement in the accountability process. As professionals, as people that are used to the subject of governance, we all need to lean in to help others actually be part of the process, be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petros. This is very interesting. I guess you've got the links particularly to, the articles or the blogs that you mentioned. Are they in the slides? Because that article that you mentioned with the 7 deadly sins, this is a very good piece of general knowledge, really. That
I don't,
goes,
but I can send you the links and all the other articles just as a
or
kind
put
of
them
wider
into
read.
the chat. I think
Okay,
that would be
will
of
do.
interest to more people, because
Sure.
it actually touches back onto culture. So thank you very much. That was extremely interesting and insightful, and I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities and questions around. Before I give the floor to our discussant, Kyriakos, I just wanted to say a couple of words on our current efforts under the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on the rule of law and European values to actually come up with ways to measure, to identify and measure some of the things that we have been speaking about tonight. So we are now in the process of deciding what indications or what indicators of the rule of law we are going to monitor in the years to come under the project, under the CROLEF, under the Center of Excellence. And we have identified 4 pillars. And these 4 pillars are civic engagement, open governance or democratic governance, functionality of justice, and democratic values. And under those pillars, we have a number of sub-pillars, and particularly under the open governance under the open governance pillar, we have 2 sub-pillars that are of much relevance to what we're saying tonight, one on anti-corruption and one on transparency. And under the 2 sub-pillars, we are going to monitor some indicators on anti-corruption or corruption and transparency in the Republic of Cyprus and some other countries. So we are a group of academics from the legal field, but not only. We have expertise as well in data analytics and thematic research. And we are now in the process of actually coming up with a scoping paper where we explain all this based on feedback, surveys, and focus groups we have done in the past few months. And events like tonight, of course, are very helpful to validate our hypothesis. So I just wanted to open that parenthesis and close that parenthesis. And I also wanted to do something that I should have done at the beginning and I didn't, which was to offer and pay our tributes, our respect to the victims of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. I ought to have done that at the beginning. And unfortunately, I'm bringing this in because, of course, beyond the human tragedy, this is unfortunately directly related to the topic of tonight. And hence the consequences on human lives. So I just wanted to bring that to the table. With no further ado, let's give the floor to Kyriakos. Just to let you know, Kyriakos, that there are a couple of questions and comments in the chat already, but we are listening to you first as the discussant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stéphanie. It is indeed a very it's a privilege to be among this I would say esteemed group of professionals and scholars to discuss, in my opinion, one of the most important issues of current domestic, at least, scenery. Corruption has been for quite some time at the top of everything that we are looking at around us, particularly the political system. And picking up from what Petros mentioned earlier on, I think that usually perception is a reality as well. So with the transparency index at that level, it depicts some sort of a reality for the country, because if we believe that we are in a country that has substantial, let's say, corruption and well, misuse of powers, then yeah, probably it is. Well, I would like to start saying that just like traffic accidents or just like flu are everywhere, corruption is everywhere. Some countries take more, let's say, hard or more appropriate measures to contain those phenomena. Others take more, take additional actions, additional tools to contain the corruption phenomenon in a country. So it's not the privilege of Cyprus to be a corrupted country. It's more or less all over the world. The difference is the appetite we have in accepting this level of corruption. We see things around. I think Klearchos and George also defined what corruption is, but I think deep down everybody knows what it is. However, we remain either inert, either passive, because it's not, we do not have anything to lose from that. Either we are complacent because it happens to someone else, or we just ignore it. The truth is it's there, and usually the corruption, and this is the first item that I would like to bring in the discussion, it's bilateral. It doesn't happen only from the political side, especially in Cyprus with the phenomena that were rightly mentioned before, nepotism, cronyism, etc., clientelism as well. Well, in most of the times, it's the civilians that chase up politicians for favors and for various types of arrangements, let's put it like that. So the first thing that I would like to put on the table for discussion is whether it's the other way, that is, whether the community, the society is geared towards corruption, is geared towards favorism to their part. And if it is so, well, that happens because they believe that the system around it is not a good one. It doesn't act on meritocracy. It doesn't act on true values. So it's a secondary question to the first, my first point on the table. We've heard, and I think very, very clearly from all speakers, that the vaccines, if it is a more relevant word nowadays, against corruption are, of course, good governance and transparency. And I fully agree with what all three mentioned before. However, are only these two, as well as legislation, of course, which has other issues to discuss there on as well. So my second, let's say, proposal for discussion is whether there are other tools apart from legislation, which most of the times doesn't really operate, and governance practices and transparency, in the sense that I agree with what Petros mentioned earlier, apply. So do we need to impose other tools, means to be deterrents of the corruption phenomenon? So we might need to expand a bit on that. And a third proposal that I would like to discuss is technology and digitalization. Obviously, to have corruption, we need the human factor. So if we eliminate through the processes, through the bureaucracy, through the decision-making processes in the public sector or in the private sector, the human factor, the human subjectivity or empathies, would that reduce the level of perceived or actual corruption or wrongdoing in the society? So I'm raising these 3 points as an initial, let's say, discussion agenda, and we'll pick up from the audience as well. So that's it from me, Stéphanie, and I would like to hear from our speakers and the participants as well, their comments.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos, for thought-provoking questions. Now, I think I will give each speaker a couple of minutes only to address Kyriakos' points, and then we will turn to the chat because there are some comments, and probably they are linked to one of the questions that Kyriakos has put, which is the second one, on what other tools are there other than legislation and corporate codes or the likes. Sorry about the dog. So let's take it in the order that we had the presentations, Klearchos, then Christian, and then Petros. Keep it brief so that we can then turn to the chat and we'll return. Thank you. You're muted, Klearchos.
Thank you. I welcome the contribution of Kyriakos. I think it was a good way to conclude the sequence of presentations, I wanted to pick up on something he said about the appetite of people to change. He's quite right. I gave emphasis to the fish rotting from the head down, but there are people further down the body of the fish who are nibbling away at the carcass and making taking advantage of it. And there needs to be a comprehensive change of culture. That's something that cannot happen overnight, but it is possible to change. I'll give you an extreme example of where culture change was possible. In 1945, when the Hitler regime disintegrated, it was possible for Germany to restructure its system of governance, to restructure its constitution, and to restructure its culture. It took a while. It took strong leadership from Adenauer, despite his mistakes as chancellor. But it was possible. But it did take strong leadership, and that leadership trickled down all the way to the grassroots of society. So the experience of Germany after 1945 illustrates, albeit in devastating circumstances, that it is possible for a profound change of culture to take place. Now, we had an opportunity to change culture in 1960 when the Republic of Cyprus was established, in 1974 when Turkey invaded and occupied. We had an opportunity in 2013 with the financial crash. We actually had an opportunity in 2011 with the Mari disaster. And on each of those occasions, the opportunity was effectively squandered. Although we have had some positive developments, including the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Authority, the Code of Conduct that Petros mentioned, and some other legislative reforms. But as has already been indicated, changing the law and putting a piece of legislation on the statute book is not enough. That requires a change of culture. So I'll go back to Kyriakos' point about appetite. Everybody needs to be, in a sense, educated as to the benefits of changing the culture and as to the disbenefits of carrying on with the old way of operating. And when we have a new presidency, we have to look on the bright side and hope for the best, but he needs to be reminded as to the benefits of leadership, from the good, strong leadership from the top down to try and change the culture. So to sum up, Kyriakos' three suggestions are important. I have some reservations about going too far in the direction of technology, partly because of the post office miscarriage of justice case in England, where we had a colossal failure of justice through over-reliance on electronic systems to produce evidence in a court of law, and partly because of the implications of technology for privacy, confidentiality, and personal data. But having said that, technology is certainly part and parcel of modern day life, and it is a good way of cracking down on corruption.
Thank you, Klearchos. Christian.
Thank you. Very good point, Kyriakos. I think that when we're talking about an appetite of change from the lower sections of society and upwards, that is a process that is going to take considerably long historical period to take place. I think if we look at Cyprus, Cyprus is a relatively new state. It's only existed for about 63 years. Its democracy, it's still, I would say, in a development stage. And therefore, while we see sort of a broader appetite of the populace sort of to see a change, I don't think that we should underestimate the sort of the breakdown of the social contract between the government and its populace. And this is essentially what corruption is doing. And therefore it creates an apathy which is very difficult to overcome unless the change comes from the top. Now, moving on, comes into your second point. So how do you what measures other than legislation can you do that? Well, you can take it to the very two, I think, most effective extremes. If you look at Greece, for example, if you look at the corruption indexes of Greece and whatever, it's scored extremely low. over the last 10 years, it has increased. The corruption index has increased tremendously. Why? Because legislation was enforced upon them. There wasn't any debate about it. They were forced to adapt to it. The other extreme option is that you gather everybody up, take them up to a square, and you shoot them. You know, you cannot, you know, having an effective development in countering, as I said, a breakdown of the social contract that corruption contributes to, I believe is impossible unless you have top-down legislation. And that, for on your third point, I belong to people that I believe corruption is an organic occurrence. It will adapt to whatever type of prevention that you throw against it, because it's so diffuse, because it's so broadly defined. You know, it may help minimize the exposure to corruption, but it will metamorphosize to something different if you apply more technology. So taking away the human factor, it's only going to have it develop into something else. And I think this is the chase that anti-corruption is doomed to sort of, you know, continue. Is, you know, the more legislation, it's like a spiral that every time you have a piece of legislation, the problem has developed into something different, and so you're always chasing, you're always a step behind with the legislation. But that's unfortunately is the name of the game, unless you have sort of cataclysmic events that sort of tear society apart, and you have a different system. But I don't think that we will see that anytime soon.
Thank you very much, Christian. Petros.
Yeah, so it was Plato that said one of the penalties of refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. And that can be applied universally. So if you do not get involved in the accountability process, then you are going to be badly governed, because the people that are governing you will not take your issues to heart. To Kyriakos' point, is it a social problem where we as a general public engage in corruption, and we actually cause our governors, in inverted commas, to be corrupt because of the expectations, the requests that we put on them? That's a good question. Now, by way of encouragement, before I wrote the code, started writing it, all the articles, before I actually put pen to paper to write the code, I commissioned public research to find out what is the attitude of the general public here in Cyprus. And it was both qualitative and quantitative over 2014 and 2015, which informed the writing of the code, which was passed by the Council of Ministers in 2017. And I can tell you that what we got, well stratified, high population that we actually interviewed and got feedback from, was they do want good governance. Fundamentally, the things that they seek are good values. Now, back to my point, what we say and what we do, that's probably where the gap is. And what we need to do is tap into the good that people want and nurture them and bring them and capacitate them to be able to hold our governors, in inverted commas, to account in a good way. So we nurture that natural tendency for the good, even though I know it's overtaken by the bad. Now, again, by way of encouragement, when I came to Cyprus 20 years ago, in the financial services, it's a completely different culture that you have now in financial services versus back then. And why is that? Because of EU regulation and the fact that it's very strict. So a generation of financial professionals has come and gone, and the practices now are completely different to what we saw 20 years ago. And that is because of law and regulation. So you need both. Now, quite often people are doing the right thing for the wrong reason, because if they don't, they'll get fined. But at least the outcome is still the right thing. But law and regulation, rules, policy, systems, procedures, internal controls, reporting plays a huge role in changing culture, but that takes time. And then you work on the mind, and then you can start focusing on the heart. So we need a heart and mind journey. Yes, let's do the short-term fix with laws and regulations, but simultaneously, let's tap into that natural good that people do want and bring that out and capacitate them to hold their governors accountable.
Thank you very much, Petros. there are a couple of comments in the chat. So I'm sorry about the dog. I tried to do something, but he's not going away. Now, there is a comment that is worth reading in the chat. It has to do with what we're discussing now, which is, can the non-punishing of bad performance in the public sector particularly be an important route for corruption, for sustainable corruption probably, as the public employees who do not perform their duties require some sort of kickbacks or kumparia to perform their duties. So that is more, I guess, a comment than a question. And around the same token, particularly when it comes to the corporate world or the enterprise world, Petros spoke about enterprise governance in particular. There is also a question, which is, how can an officer who implements good practices do so and continue doing so where there is resistance within the space, the enterprise space, because it's easier to look elsewhere, obviously. So your comments, very brief comments on these 2 points. Anyone, any of you, including Kyriakos?
Yeah, I'll, if I may, I'll 2 or 3 brief comments. I call them the 3 I's, which are really deadly to any organization and any democratic culture. We have them in abundance in the Republic of Cyprus, I regret to say. I'll begin with the softest of the 3. That's inefficiency. The question relates to the sort of the corrupt, the impropriety side of the picture. But what we also have in the Republic of Cyprus that we haven't really discussed today is inefficiency. It took me 16 months without pulling any strings initially to secure my Republic of Cyprus passport after Brexit. I applied for Republic of Cyprus passport. It took me 16 months. I went through the proper channels. I submitted all my papers. I didn't use any connections. And then what happened? Silence. I was communicating with the ministry, no response. I was sending emails, no response. I was picking up the phone. Nobody was picking up the phone at the other end. I eventually got through to an answer machine and left a message. Nobody responded. So I eventually had to find somebody who knew somebody, who knew somebody, who knew somebody in that ministry to go and find my file, which was in a basement somewhere lost. And if I didn't use that person who knew somebody, who knew somebody, who knew somebody, I wouldn't have discovered that my file had gone missing. And that happened on 2 occasions. My file went missing on 2 occasions in 2 separate government buildings until I eventually secured my passport. Now, that's an example of inefficiency. And it's that sort of culture of inefficiency that produces the brown envelope, that produces the favour, that produces the improper conduct that is fertile ground for corruption. So I had to admit I had to resort to these measures because otherwise nothing would have happened. Second I that's really deadly in this is impunity. This is what the question is driving at. There is a culture of wrongdoing and a culture of non-law enforcement and therefore a culture of impunity. And it creates this vicious circle that is never ending. Let's hope the new independent anti-corruption authority can help break that cycle and help bring an end to the impunity, but time will tell. And the third I is immunity. You've had this concept of people being immune from the law, whether it's parliamentarians, whether it's the president, whether it's anybody else as a result of de facto mechanisms. You have immunity as well, which is part of the problem. So what we need to do is improve efficiency as well as good conduct and good governance in the public sector, as well as the private sector. And we need to improve efficiency. We need to ensure law enforcement, which brings an end to impunity. And in a sense, we want the rule of law to apply uniformly. The rule of law hinges on the principle that nobody is above the law. We need to reduce the category of people who are above the law for constitutional or for legislative reasons, or for cultural reasons for that matter.
Thank you, Klearchos. And you could add to this, of course, privileges and entitlements. So that goes together with immunity. Kyriakos, there is a comment in the chat that actually touches upon what we are discussing right now. Kyriakos.
Well, I would like to fully agree with what Klearchos said about the 3 eyes. And apparently those 3 eyes took off our 2 eyes in what we see around us. Yeah, I would definitely agree, especially with the impunity, which we see wrong things happening, but we don't see any repercussions on anyone, either because there is lack of evidence, lack of willingness to come up and speak, or there is an inefficient, going back to inefficiency, judicial system that either prolongs indefinitely sometimes court cases or rejects them, possibly of lack of convincing evidence or supporting evidence. So yeah, I think impunity is fundamental because nobody at the end of the day gets punished for anything. Usually there are some several scapegoats, and that's all more or less. And I agree with the inefficiency as well, because it's what I said before, because the system operates in a manner that does not care more or less for the ordinary civilian, and it is operating not on the merits or on the competence or the qualities of the people. The question earlier about the civil servants and how we can deal with that, it's difficult because we go again back to the immunity that civil servants enjoy, immunity regarding their employment. So you cannot fire them, you cannot change them, you cannot actually transfer them to another ministry, which is something also important. And yes, there is a huge need to inject serious reforms in the way the employment regime in the wider public sector is done. So if they feel that if someone feels that his job is not jeopardized in any way, then why improve, change, or do something different? And this leads us back to accountability as to who is accountable and what repercussions it has. On another note, and I finish with that, we do focus on the punishment side. That is, if someone doesn't act well or if someone underperforms, then there is impact on that person. And we tend not to focus on the praise side, possibly praise those that are doing better, possibly within the expectation spectrum, but they're standing out, with the hope that the others who are not being praised might try to come up with the benefits that those that appear to excel get. So we might need to change a bit our side towards giving a praise, a benefit, a bonus, more or less, to someone that performs his or her tasks in the appropriate manner than just trying to deal with possibly the majority of those not doing so well.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos. Could I ask whoever has not spoken yet, I think Petros has not spoken yet, or maybe also Christian, if you want to give a few couple of sentences and then we close the webinar.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'll just say that emphasizing the need of an efficient judiciary that enforces the laws, and also that communicates any deficiencies in the laws, that there are proper commissions and communication with the relevant authorities to ensure that the relevant perpetrators get properly punished. I think the lack of punishment is the reason why there is a public apathy to these sort of things.
Petros?
Yeah, and I agree. I actually wrote an article. You'll see that transparency is not enough. Without accountability, there is no governance. The mafia is very transparent in terms of what it does, but that no one holds them accountable, which is why you have organized crime. So you have to hold people to account, and if that doesn't happen, there's no governance. Back to Kyriakos' great point about inefficiency. That's why sustainability is so important. Medium to long-term efficiency and effectiveness. Again, without efficiency, you don't have good governance. So these things all wrap up. Probity is the ethics part. Again, I go back to good governance depends ultimately on the people involved. You can have the best form and structure, but if it's not implemented by the people with the decision-making rights, then you don't have good governance. Now, I will leave us on a high note. This election was determined by 15,000 votes. Now, if enough people in Cyprus care and they mobilize, and back to the point, what can we do about corruption? We are the professionals. This is our stock in trade. We need to lean into the effort and mobilize the general public to get them active in the system to hold those people who have power accountable. So that's what I think we should be doing. And anyone interested in working together on this call to take it to the next level, I'm focusing on the public sector. Let's get together and let's make sure that we have a mobilized public that are going to hold the boards of the state-owned enterprises accountable.
Thank you very much, Petros. And that brings us to some other sub-pillars of the measuring of the rule of law that I was referring to before under the CROLEF, under the Center of Excellence on the Rule of Law and European Values. As I said, the first pillar is civic engagement. And under that pillar, one of the sub-pillars is called citizen empowerment. So it's exactly what you are referring to. We spoke a lot about perceptions before, and of course, perceptions are extremely important, especially when you are talking about civil society and citizens' perceptions. And they are very often underestimated. So this is one of the focuses that we will have via, there are many different tools you can use, such as focus groups and the likes, to have a good sense of perceptions. And on this island, we probably don't have enough such tools. And then I wanted to come back to accountability, of course, which is the other side of the coin of independence, of transparency. And accountability is also in our list of sub-pillars under democratic values. So I hope I will be able to give you more information about our progress on measuring the rule of law in Cyprus. We also call on anyone who is interested, either from the public sector or the private sector perspective, to assist us, because we will have two target groups, basically the professionals and then the citizens, to help us feed into this exercise. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some more information. Actually, our second webinar in the current CPD series is on the 9th of March, 2023, same time, same place, but slightly different people. And we will focus next time on fraud and bribery. And the same question, what can we do to confront them? So again, we are raising the same question, but into different areas of bad practices. And I would like to encourage everyone to join us for that second webinar and the ones to come. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your patience and your comments as well. And your nice appreciations of what we do. Please spread the word. We could be more to those webinars, and I'm sure we will be more. It's just that we had no time to promote this first webinar, but via the network of ICPAC, CISI, and UCLan Cyprus, we can definitely grow the network. I would like to thank again our speakers, our discussant tonight, as well as anyone who has helped putting this together, particularly Klearchos and Petros. I wish you a very pleasant evening, and I look forward to seeing all of you again on the 9th of March online. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lucas. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.